Hey everybody, hope you're doing really well. So we're going to take a look in this video at the topic of copying hand tool designs. There's a very emotive subject within the hand tool community. A lot of people have very strong opinions. Now I'm going to take you through a bit of a guide as I see it. It's only my opinion, it's not a fact. This isn't a view where it's law or I'm telling you to do anything, just my feelings on it. So let's come and take a look at some of these tools and take a trace back through some of their DNA and see where some of the influence is. So here we go. The OG, the original layout of metal cast planes. This is the one that won the war. This is the layout which everything comes back to if you make a hand plane that people want to use and buy today. This plane is as relevant now as it was all those times ago. This works as well as any plane does. This is a number 8 Stanley. It's quite an old one. It lacks some of the features of the more modern ones. The depth adjustment works the opposite way round, and it doesn't have a screw on the back there to move the frog backwards and forwards. None of that matters because we don't move our frogs around. That doesn't help, but that adjustment wheel is really boring. But this layout won, there's a whole history you can look at about how Stanley developed this and Leonard Bailey and that whole journey. But this template, this one. So, like anything, if you come up with something original, you've invested in it and you've done all of that, you need to be rewarded for that. And over time, there were patents and Stanley enjoyed developing themselves into a big, confident company that were offering good quality tools. But like anything, you do need competition in that marketplace. That's reasonable. So over time, the decades move on and planes evolve in their design, and you've got Stanley and other companies such as Record step in. Now you can look at these planes, the Stanley and the Record, these much later ones, and these are by far, in my opinion, the superior planes when compared to the older one that we looked at first. We look at that side profile, the silhouette, there's no obvious detailing. In fact, if we were to just take that Record plane and to spray it black, we were to maybe to remove the logos, put plain lever caps on, you would be mistaken from thinking these are just from the same company, because this template is just so perfect. You understand that? It's a world beater. So why would you want to design a plane that's worse? So once the patents had gone, Record companies, other ones, they needed to produce the same thing because that's what the market wanted. And that's what happened. The only thing that ID'd the Record planes was that they were blue. That was it. And obviously they've got Record on it. They could have tried a few other things, maybe a different coloured timber work, slightly different layer on their lever caps, but they didn't. It's pretty much a copy and paste design. I don't think the Records are any better quality than the Stanleys. They just both work equally well. They're both great tools. And I think that's how that should have been. To me, that feels appropriate at that time. You've got professionals, carpenters, joiners, furniture makers, home woodworkers, wanting quality tools made well, and that's just perfect. But then things changed over time. Stanley and Record, because of market forces, I guess, kind of lost interest in their hand plane range. I don't think woodworking was as focused on those traditional skills. You had things like lots of electric tools coming out, and maybe people just weren't into woodworking, I don't know. But the quality just nosedived. It tanked, it was through the floor, and then other companies had to step in. The big one you're going to think of is Lee Nielsen. You've got a company here like Clifton, and Lee Nielsen, as you probably know, they chose to revive the Bedrock line of planes, and they did a fantastic job of that. Now the Bedrocks, as you probably know, they were Stanley's kind of failed attempt at trying to upsell a product. At the end of the day, your average user didn't know any difference. I don't know any difference using a Bedrock. If your irons are sharp and you can use a plane, a Bedrock makes no difference. But hey, it's a good enough platform to choose, and they make beautiful tools. I mean, real high quality things that you can buy and it just holds its value. It's probably better than investing money somewhere. You can sell them for more than they were the purchase price quite often. They're collectible as well and enjoyable. They're beautiful things. So you had this situation where you've got premium tools like Lee Nielsen's, Clifton's, Veritas. We'll take a look at Veritas in a minute. That's a special case I'm going to come on to. And then the market was split in two. You had either pay high prices, which were fair prices, because making these kind of tools in Western countries is expensive. Anybody who manufactures in the West knows that. There's a price to be paid for it, and especially if that's quality. And then you've got the other end of the market where it's like, okay, you want to get into woodworking, and so you've got to do up something secondhand to make it work. And I think over time, when this transition was happening, you had a lot of magazines, bloggers, video makers, instructors, journalists, and they were really excited about these tools. They were really excited about the bedrocks, and this new phrase almost came about, the premium tool. And you'd see them crop up in, magazine articles, reviews, instructional videos, and it would even be talked of that, the Stanley templates and the records, these weren't any good. These would chatter, these weren't good enough, the irons weren't thick enough, which was all, it's an opinion, I don't share it, I think it's kind of nonsense. But then you get this situation where a lot of people who come new to the craft think, well, I don't want to have to put up with that second-rate plane, but I can't afford this really expensive one. And this is a very unique situation that happened, is then we had some imports coming in from China. Now, you can research those for yourself, and some of the first to come in for the hand tools that I'm aware of are the Wood River line of planes. They're made in China, and you can for yourself contrast the appearance of those planes with the Lee Nielsen. Now, I know from doing some personal research, I know some things were a bit odd on that first run. If you look at, I don't know, you might have one, an early number 6 Wood River plane, the handle on the back was cast far too far back, so you couldn't actually reach the adjusting wheels. So something wasn't quite right there. But they were a fraction of the price of Lee Nielsen. But it caused a lot of controversy because if we look back at, we'll bring in the Stanley and the record again. The Wood Rivers looked remarkably similar to the Lee Nielsen. And again, research that for yourself. You make your own decision. There wasn't even a change in colour. At least Record went for a colour change, which at least created their own brand identity. And with Clifton here, they never got into any hot water with using the bedrock system, because this looks uniquely Clifton. You can compare that to a Lee Nielsen and you know immediately that that's a Clifton plane. The colour is different, the casting is different, the woodwork, the iron, lever cap, it's all completely different. But the Wood River looks so similar, and it made a lot of people upset. They felt that it was just a complete copy rip-off job. Now, there's a few ways to look at that. Part of me feels that the kind of person that is going to buy a Lee Nielsen will never buy a Wood River, because they have more disposable income. They're just going to go for that product in the same way that one individual can afford maybe a Rolex, probably not the best comparison. The other person might go for a Seiko. Both are going to hold the time fine, both good looking watches. And some, even in watches, people take influence from each other. Just look at a Rolex Submariner and see how that's influenced design. Tangent. But you get my drift. So there was a lot of hot water, and there's a lot of people with passionate views on that situation. Now, some of those views, I think, amuse me somewhat, because they come from people within the community, and they're vehemently disappointed that the tools were, in their view, copied. And I've seen them produce woodworking projects which are facsimiles of historical pieces, which they say is not a copy when they are copies. So it's very, very difficult about this situation. And in my opinion, I don't think Lee Nielsen were damaged that much. I'd imagine they'd be upset. I'd be upset if someone took a wonderful thing that I'd made and then something appeared that looked just like it, in their opinion. You can find all information on this. And I think that's the trick that you need to learn. The trick was, and Clifton played it well, really well, create your own identity. Record, for instance, their bench planes followed the same template as the Stanleys, but they added different style plough planes. They had unique takes on other tools, so their range of offerings were different. And Wood River went on to do that. Their block plane is different. Their shoulder planes are different. They offer a plough plane, something that Lee Nielsen don't currently do. So that's the key lesson to have learned from Wood River when all of that happened many years ago, is create your own identity. Now, there's been a different situation that's flared up recently. Now, all of those tools we've looked at so far are really what I would call your classic woodworking tool designs. The kind of things that you could show somebody, or you could have sign written on the side of a van or a business card, and people know you're a woodworker. Now these two, again, this one I bought the same time as a Clifton. This needs some refurbishment, and this is going to be an opportunity for me to share information about bevel up planes, but it's in a little bit of a sorry state, but that's immaterial. But these look very unique, don't they? These have a very different silhouette. You might almost say a kind of a trade dress. It's a very different look to the classic lines of a plane that we might expect from Clifton or from Lee Nielsen. Now Veritas, they do their bevel down planes as well, and again they look distinctly different. You know it's a Veritas by looking at it. And both Lee Nielsen and Veritas offer this very coveted tool, which is the router plane. Okay, now the router plane it's really become popular over the past few years. It's become something that probably a lot of home woodworkers really want to get their hands onto. And it's interesting because if they were so useful, which they are, don't get me wrong, you'd think they'd be as ubiquitous as a number 4, but they're not. They're not even as ubiquitous as perhaps a number 5.5 or a number 6. And they fetch really high prices, the vintage ones, to the point where when I looked at buying one, it's like, do you know what? I'm going to get myself a router plane. I've never needed one in nearly 3 decades. But okay, let's see how they work. And I've normally used the wooden ones when I do need to use them. It's like, okay, you get one. It's like you can actually buy a Veritas for pretty much the same kind of money as a vintage Stanley. And very much like Lee Nielsen, you've got great resale value, really high quality product. With these, you get different ranges of irons, fences, lots of different stuff going on, but it's a really well-respected tool, nicely made. I have no complaints with it. I can share more information on this plane over time. But one really different thing that's happened is that we've moved now, we're talking about people who are more home woodworkers perhaps, rather than the professionals. And a lot of those people enjoy videos like this. Again, if you're watching, thank you. If you've got this far, well done. And I think one thing, since I took a break from doing videos and now I'm back doing them again, there's a lot of people doing what I would call, they feel like to me, infomercials. They're people who are presenting a problem that I quite often feel is almost imagined, and then providing a solution. Now, there is a router plane on the market now, and I'm not going to buy it, but it looks remarkably similar to this router plane, and Veritas tools are really distinctive, really distinctive. They've just got a real look about them which says, hello, I'm a Veritas tool. Now the difference with the alternative router plane is, I think it's called a Cat Moses, strange name, but I think that's the individual who sells them. The adjustment mechanism looks like it's a different version of this, and it's plonked onto what appears to be a casting that's at least very similar, but it has that same silhouette. Now, I personally feel there's a mistake that's been made there, and it's the same mistake that Wood River made when they did their range of bench planes, is that they didn't, what I would call, do a Clifton. Okay? Clifton bench planes look like Clifton bench planes. Okay? The new router plane that I took a look at, to me, looks, I'm not saying that it looks like a Veritas router with a bolt-on adjustment mechanism, like an after-sales piece. And it was a real shame that an individual, and I don't know the man, I can't criticise him, I've never met him, I don't wish him any ill, But it was a real missed opportunity for him to take these things are often unavailable. You can't get hold of them. Quite often they're out of stock. If he wants to outsource his product manufacturing to China, it's a free option to you. You can do that. But if you've got a lot of followers on social media, at least create something that looks your own. Create your own identity. Okay? You can't really reinvent the wheel that much. You know, the Clifton pretty much is still working in the same way as any bedrock plane, but at least make it look your own. Some people would disagree with me. They would say that the adjustment mechanism is enough. Just doing that is enough on the Cat's Moses router plane. That creates enough of a visual difference. For me, I just think it's a little bit of a mistake not to do that. So yeah, that's kind of how these things go. And a lot of people get really defensive about the Veritas situation, and I understand that, because you know it's difficult to run a manufacturing business in the West. And one final couple of bits, the Veritas plane and the Cat's Moses plane, bearing in mind the Cat's Moses is made in a lower labour charge sector, which is in China, then it's shipped over to Western countries, it costs about the same as the Veritas. Now, some people may feel that the Cat's Moses has better features, but for me, the deal normally is with that, is that, say with the Rolex analogy, why would you pay a Rolex price for a Seiko? Why would you do that? It doesn't make sense to me. If his offering was coming in and being cheaper, I would think, well, I can see why you've done that. There's an option for people. So that's another thing to bear in mind. If you're going to be buying tools and it's an import version, like a Wood River or whatever, think about that resale value and think about how you're spending your money. Remember, it's yours, you earned it, you don't have to give it over to anybody. And one quick last one before we go, before the video gets super long, is these metal marking gauges. Now, I bought the Veritas because I think it's well priced and it's a good gauge. Now, there's a lot of stuff. Again, you can look online. There's the type mark gauge, which costs at least 3 times as much as the Veritas. Now, the type mark is an amazing gauge, and I believe that suffers the same situation where it's being copied abroad, and again, there isn't any effort to make it perhaps look different. I haven't looked into the gauge as much because for me, one wheeled marking gauge is enough. It works well for fine work, but I do prefer the wooden ones. But the type mark wasn't completely just one person's think it up out of nowhere. You've heard me mention on the channel before a woodworker called Jim Kingshot. In one of his books, he developed a gauge that was very close. And I believe, I might be wrong, anybody can correct me, I believe the maker of the type mark got an engineer to make a version of that gauge and then further refined it. So this is the tricky thing. I mean, where do you stop on that journey? Does Jim Kingshot's estate, are they owed something for the design he put together? I don't know. And the danger is, the final bit, honestly, I'll leave you now. Once we start telling everybody in the woodworking community that things like wooden marking gauges and Bailey planes are somehow substandard and you can't get good results with them, and you say that these kind of tools, you need them and that's the only way to get good results, and my word, it's a night and day difference, you create a bit of a monster. People should be open and to say, actually, I just love the fact that this is a really quality made item. I could just get just the same results with this, but I love the fact this is domestically made. It's the same enjoyment I get from maybe buying a nice timepiece or whatever, and they're both equally good. This is just a celebration of manufacturing and woodworking in a different way. And I think that's one of the, and I can understand why it happened. There's this horrible fear of missing out, and I think it creates that need for people to go into AliExpress and think, can I find something that looks like a bedrock, and I'm just going to spend a bit less money and then I'll look really cool like the latest woodworkers. Forget that. Be yourself. These kind of tools are just effective as these, and you can build a whole toolkit for nearly the price of one of these new. But that's not snobbery. I love these. It's just about balance. So I hope that gives you a bit of perspective. I've not tried to blame anybody or say anybody's done wrong or right or whatever, but I think anybody who's inspired by tool designs and has got some good ideas, don't be lazy. Create your own identity. I appreciate the DNA is everywhere. You're not going to completely change it, but just make it your own, truly your own, and maybe people won't be quite so argumentative.